Breakfast Special.
Welcome to the Breakfast Special. The startup ecosystem in the Philippines has remained robust and resilient in 2023, raising some 956 million US dollars in funds despite strong global headwinds. According to this year's Global Startup Ecosystem Report, Manila's startup ecosystem, now valued at 6.4 billion US dollars, was driven by the economic impact of exits and startup valuations and continued at a 72% compound annual growth rate from July 2019 to December 2023. Now, to help us better understand the Philippines' potential as a tech innovation hub, we're joined by Minette Navarrete, president of Kickstart Ventures. She is no stranger to the Philippine startup scene. Since 2012, she has helmed Kickstart Ventures, the corporate venture arm of major telco services provider Globe Telecom. Hi, Minette. Welcome to the Breakfast Show. How are you this morning?
Happy to be here, and thank you for inviting us, Audrey. Excited to share.
You're welcome. We're very happy to have you on. And we also have with us today Joan Yao, Vice President of Investments at Kickstart Ventures. Joanne, good morning to you as well. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Audrey. Great to be here.
It's great to be chatting with you both today. So let's start off with Minette, by talking about Kickstart, which is one of the first VC firms to be set up in the Philippines. So from its inception about 12 years ago until today, what are the biggest changes you've observed in the industry in the Philippines?
Gosh, Audrey, when we talk about venture capital, I think we go back a little earlier than Kickstart, maybe about 15 years earlier to be precise. So in '97, probably the first venture firm spun out of a boutique investment advisory firm. So this is ICCP, the Investment and Capital Corporation of Philippines, by the venerable Gilly Luchanco, a really seasoned investment banker. And it took about maybe 15 years or so for us, certainly. Kickstart Ventures spun out of Globe Telecom in 2012. And so from the first kind of 15 years to 2012, a lot of the investment was going into more traditional businesses, more conventional investment vehicles. And then from 2012, Kickstart maybe, as you'd said, the earliest. But also there were a number of other corporates coming into the scene, making investments as well. We had some really good impact investors as well. Our friends from Exchange who were making investments in impact social enterprises, LGTVP, where I first met Joanne, and the angel networks were starting to come through. And then and a lot of that is, more formal, more institutional investing, I suppose. 6 years later, 2018-ish, we started to see more independents coming up, usually run by individuals who had previously worked in startups. And then around, I'm going to say 2021, we started to see family offices coming on the scene. So it's quite a young industry. It's barely just a little more than a quarter of a century. And for a while, we did see a number of overseas investors coming in. The ones from Southeast Asia, our friends largely from Singapore, some of them from Indonesia, as well as some of the big US firms. The US firms, coming in, especially in the heady days of 2020, 2021, they have not made many investments since then. And then you'll see that the slow buildup of investing has come because I suppose Philippines, like many Southeast Asian countries, there are a lot of more conventional investment options. But I think coming into the last dozen years or so, there's much more interest in alternative investment vehicles, ranging in, which were the kind of the safest ones, like real estate, to the higher risk ones, like you look at obviously PE, VC, crypto in the more recent years. I guess when I think about it, corporates play a key role in many Southeast Asian ecosystems. And it's no different for Philippines. Corporates provide capital, so the checks like everyone else, But also, I think there is a different kind of commitment because the strategic intent to drive innovation and transformation makes them patient. So there is a
Yeah.
tendency to commit rather than cash out, I suppose. And the corporate connections will always help.
Yeah, so Minette, with more and more tech startups you've brought up, across the world in a wide range of industries, as a corporate VC fund, you guys are probably spoiled for choice. So, what sort of philosophy do you adopt when it comes to, shopping in this huge tech marketplace? Like, would you say there's now an oversaturation of tech startups?
Oh my gosh, absolutely no oversaturation. I think we'd like to see more, in fact. When you talk about shopping, I think different venture capital firms will have a different focus, different investment mandate. And, as a corporate venture capital firm, Kickstart, I guess using your metaphor, we're less trend driven and more collection driven. We care about
Mm,
building an ecosystem where we operate. And we have a thesis that guides our investments, which will adapt over the years as we see the ecosystem evolving. So, our first fund in 2012 was about bringing digital solutions for consumers and businesses. And when you cast your eyes back to 2012, for many emerging markets like the Philippines, broadband adoption was less than a quarter of the population. Smartphones were just becoming more popular, more affordable. And so we needed to sort of hold the hand of the customers and help them discover a more digital world or more digital way of living. By 2015, we could see that a lot of digital adoption was picking up. And so we were starting to look for TMT solutions, I guess, telco, media, technologies that will help make more immediate impact, more
mm.
utility. By the time 2020 rolled around, we started to imagine a future. And you have to remember, this is like right smack in the first year of the pandemic. And one of the things that investors need to do is to think about not just the present world, but the future. And so we have a thesis about the future of data, the future of work, the future of communities and the spaces that we occupy, and the future of natural resources and how those are distributed. And so looking in a very disciplined fashion allows us to develop some depth and expertise where we invest.
Okay, Joanne. So let's turn to you now and focus on the fintech sector in the Philippines, which is, growing really rapidly, especially with the surge in digital payments and over 300 companies innovating in this space. What do you think it takes for fintech startups to truly stand out in such a competitive environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think fintech has really been one of the bright spots of the Philippine startup ecosystem. And before we entered the pandemic in 2019, GCash, our mobile wallet at Globe, had 20 million users. And today, kind of as of 2024, we now have about 90 million. The scale and rate of adoption digital financial services, of course accelerated by COVID, has really been staggering, and it's opened up so many opportunities. I think really the key thing that helps fintech startups stand out in the space is a deep understanding of the customer, really trying to understand customer pain points with fresh eyes and meeting them where they are, rather than just thinking about it in terms of traditional banking or insurance products. In many cases, fintechs are offering a different user experience to the customer, whether that's easier onboarding, application, filing for claims, things that have traditionally been very difficult and time consuming processes with more traditional financial institutions. Fintechs are using tech to enable a better and more streamlined experience.
So, with how competitive this space is, are there particular gaps in the fintech market that you believe present opportunities for growth in the coming year?
Absolutely. While there's been so much growth already, our view at Kickstart is there is still so much more ground to cover and so much further to go. No? So financial inclusion, broadening access to financial products, whether that's savings, investments, loans or insurance. The Filipino is underbanked and underserved with regards to many of these product categories. And you see not just GCash, but other digital banks and startups trying to address these gaps. A few I'd like to kind of highlight. One, I guess, like credit. Credit still remains a huge gap in the Philippines, particularly for MSMEs, which are micro, small, and medium enterprises. I was reading a study by the Central Bank of the Philippines, their national strategy for financial inclusion. More than half of borrowers source their loans from informal sources, specifically family and friends and
Mm-hmm.
informal lenders. So 54% of the loans that are being made in the Philippines are not coming from financial institutions. They're just coming from friends and family and informal lenders.
Mm.
So huge gap there, I think. I think related to that, we're keen to look at opportunities in B2B, fintech and lending. So whether that's processing and financing of accounts receivables, trade and working capital financing, cross-border payments, collections. So startups that serve the business needs of companies or the banking needs of companies. And then finally, as kind of I was talking about earlier, also insurance, insurtech. I think Filipinos or the insurance rate in the Philippines is still relatively low. We're looking at about 20%, 25%. And a lot of that is just the government mandatory coverage. And so I think that I see great opportunity in expanding insurance coverage, particularly kind of in embedded finance applications, which means you look at existing customer bases, for example, like those in the rural banks and microfinance institutions who may not have access to insurance. And then you think about a tech enabled way to deliver insurance or other financial services to them.
All right, Minette. So, considering the significant influence of global tech players like
Mm.
the US, China, Japan, right? So many people are closely watching the upcoming presidential elections in the US. So, how do you think the results could impact the tech landscape and the opportunities available for startups from the Philippines?
It's a great question. And investors like ourselves, as we invest globally with quite a lot of our dollars in North America as well as rest of Southeast Asia, not only in the Philippines, then there is quite some impact on the U.S. presidential elections. Certainly for ourselves, interest rates and how the Fed will move in the next
Hmm.
administration, but also incentives for investment. A couple of years ago, the United States administration, the Biden administration, introduced the Inflation Reduction Act. And that was investing quite a lot of capital, hundreds of billions of dollars in areas like energy, like electric vehicles, like environmental justice, um, many of which many of those categories have um, a consistent alignment with our investment mandates. And so that helps the companies that are in those spaces, which are spaces that we invest in. Um, and similarly, I imagine regulations, so the regulatory environment will also be influenced by who wins the elections. When you think of areas like technology, like finance, like healthcare, um, novel foods, when we look at food security investments that we've made, or advanced materials, which the FDA may or may not regulate in or regulate out. So all that means that who wins in the presidential elections in the US will have some impact because of the shape of the policies that they have. But another way of looking at it is that who the next occupant of the White House is going to be is kind of less impact, I guess, to Philippine startups versus who sits in our version of the White House, the Malacanang
Mm.
Palace. It a lot of the policies that impact the startups in Philippines are going to have to do with Philippine economy. Many of the startups are heavily influenced by the fact that Philippine GDP is growing fast. And historically, it's been driven by consumer spend. But in the last quarter, much of that growth had come from government spending, over 10% growth year on year. Philippine policies will impact. We have had a historically very progressive central bank. All the companies that we invested in fintech come away with a view that the Philippine Central Bank is very collaborative, is looking to solutions. And the previous Secretary of Finance, Secretary Dominguez, had this ambition to shift many of the payments and transactions in Philippines from cash to digital. And therefore, the ecosystem around fintech was moving to enable that. So whether there are incentives or disincentives for innovation and investment, for education, a lot of that is very domestic. And so, on one hand, yes, on one hand, maybe not as much as the domestic policies.
Yeah, for sure. Some great points that you brought up there. Of course, the domestic policies probably take center stage, but still, all eyes
Mm.
are going to be on the US this November to see who is going to take it to the White House. All right, Joanne, as we wrap up, let's touch on the importance of international collaborations and talent development in startups. Could we get your weigh in on some common obstacles that maybe discourage talented individuals from entering the startup ecosystem? And what advice would you give to those considering a venture into the space?
I think for talented people anywhere in the world, I imagine they think a lot about the risk reward equation and the opportunity cost of venturing into the startup ecosystem versus other options they might have. I think the equation has been evolving over the last 5 years, at least, for sure. It's not as risky, I think, as it once was, especially in the area of fintech, right? So I think my 3 points of advice, number one, I think you don't have to start your own right away, right? There are many great companies to join and learn from, to get your feet wet and build your network in the ecosystem. Once you've done that, onto my second point, you can then kind of find the pain point you want to solve. You can narrow down, right? And start small and grow as you find traction. And number three, like, I think with any journey, with any endeavor, right, finding the right partners on that journey, whether it's co-founders or early investors and customers, is very important. And I guess just to end, right, I think the way we see it at Kickstart, like technologies like mobile, like digital, like AI, these are continuously opening up opportunities to reinvent and redefine industries, including financial services. And the businesses of tomorrow, they're being built today. So we hope you will build them with us.
Oh, I love that. The businesses of tomorrow are being built today. Yes. Well, a great overview on the evolving landscape of the Philippine startup ecosystem, particularly in the tech and fintech sectors. Minette, Joanne, thanks so much for your time and insights this morning. We really appreciate having you both on.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Minette Navarrete, President of Kickstart Ventures, as well as Joanne Yao, Vice President of Investments at Kickstart Ventures. Stay ahead with Money FM 89.3.
Money FM 89.3.